Hello, I'm Dr. Vaijanta Anand. I'm Associate Professor with Nirmala Niketan College of Social Work, which is affiliated to University of Mumbai. And I'll be talking about value framework in community practice, which is part of the subject or course community organization, which is again part of the subject social work education. So let's look at value framework in community practice. Okay, so what is value framework? It's very important in community practice because we have to look at underlying values. We have to look at the concepts like social justice, social inclusion, self-determination, and empowerment. And this all happens when we are working together, learning together, developing sustainable communities. And also we need to understand what are the assumptions and what are the guiding purposes when we are doing community practice. Why do we need value base in community practice? We need value base because community practice cannot happen unless and until there is a value base. But at the same time, it is not value free too, because we see in the society or in the community that there are a lot of people, communities which are excluded from the socio-economic and political system. They are deprived of the opportunities, they lack material resources, there is a cultural oppression, physical obstacles, prejudices, and that all leads to exclusion of entire groups. And our focus of community practice is working with this group, working with the excluded and transforming changes or bringing transformative changes in their lives. So values are connected with working with these communities. So when we are talking about values, why do we need values? Again, we look at some of the things. It promotes social inclusion, because if you have a proper value base, your goal of inclusive community development, your goal of social justice will be achieved in a better way. So for this we are looking at what happens if you look at the value framework. It basically helps in promoting individual capacities of the people living in the community. It helps in promoting the community capacities, because what are the community capacities? Because community capacities would include democratic practices, it would include opportunities which are available and which will be reaching out to the excluded groups. So it's an active process where you are encouraging people's participation. So it's not just people, it's with the people. So you're talking about participative, dynamic process which is going along with democratic values, and there is action along with reflection. What are the ideas? Okay, so idea is that community development promotes strong communities. It talks about communities which are strong in terms of every citizen or every person who is staying in the community is participating in the process. Okay, so it would be like there is active citizenship, there is complete full citizenship. Not a single person in the community feels that he or she is not included in the decision making or is not included while availing the services. And there is an expression of, there is a kind of a shared responsibility, there is an understanding of all dimensions of all persons who are in the community. And there is also an understanding with regard to whatever are the services in the community, like it might be sports, recreation, various things which are available in the community, whether there is shared kind of accessibility to all the people in the community. Let us look at when we are talking about community-led collective action, because as we said, community development would mean participation of everybody in the community. So if you're talking about community-led collective action, that means you need to have solidarity, you need to have common aspects which are there with the people, and also common aspects of problems. Each individual faces individually some of the problems, but if they are staying in the community, there are common aspects which are common to all individuals. But if there are common problems and common aspects, then people have to work together. And if people have to work together, they need to have common interest, There has to be a community leadership which emerges out of the collective of the people, which is not autocratic in nature. And this small scale or large level activities which encourages collective action, which meets the local needs, as well as is participative in the action and lobbies for change, that is what leads to community development. So this is the idea behind understanding of community development. So when you're talking about community development, one of the pillars of community development is participative democracy. Why do you call it participative democracy? Because democracy is not a name. It talks about participation of every individual who is part of the community. So it has to be widespread, there has to be active participation in public affair, and there has to be a better understanding of the issues, values. There has to be an understanding in the community who is benefiting all the services, who is benefiting from the services, who is actually organizing all these services, and who are excluded from the services. Because if the community is aware of who is excluded, then probably that those people can be encouraged to be part of the whole participatory democracy process in the community. So there has to be innovative way of meeting needs, there has to be partnership, there has to be a system whereby community develops and administers various kinds of services which will benefit all without exclusion of any group in the community. So when we talk about all these things, one is participatory democracy, which we looked at the earlier slide. The next one is empowerment. We all know that exclusion happens basically because people who are excluded are not empowered. They do not have access to decision making. They do not have access to influence policies or programs. So community development encourages these communities and groups to learn how to develop power relationships, how to assert themselves, and how they develop ability to deal with the problems. So the focus is on problem focused learning. So what happens is people learn and they get engaged in understanding their own problems, and when they get engaged in understanding their problem, they also go to causes of the problem. They also learn, while they are understanding the causes of problem, how to tackle it, and they develop skills in basically understanding their own needs, understanding the cause effect or causal factors, and resolving them as a group, instead of waiting for somebody from outside or some organization coming there and resolving it. So when you're talking about community development, why wait for the problems? When you're working in the community, we also talk about preventive action. It would mean that community is seeking to identify various causes of the problem and trying to see if this problem can be resolved before it leads to manifestation, which probably will be more problematic. So strong communities have capacities to look at potential problems and avert the impact of these problems, causing a major kind of further aggravated problems for the communities. So how does this happen? It can happen by the methods of collaboration, where the government and the community and the citizens and the outside community, people come together, they collaborate with each other. Sometimes there may be confrontation because the causes of the problem is basically power groups who are basically discriminatory towards the people in the community. So there it may lead to confrontation, and there is also a space for understanding strengths and weaknesses of all the groups involved, and that leads to some kind of better collaboration or understanding of how people can come together and get engaged in community development. One needs to look at community development with regard to policies, because what community development does is it defines and influences policies. Community development has a lot of impact on the policy framework. How? Because what happens is, when you're looking at the perspective of communities, when you're looking at the way community looks at the issues, you are basically looking at the value system. There is a value system which is at the core of the socio-economic development of the community. So, whenever you're talking about community organizing, social planning, or progressive social change, you talk about value base. When you're talking about the value base, you have to talk about right-based approach. When you talk about right-based approach, you have to talk about people-centric. It has to be anti-charity, it has to be anti-dependency, and anti-oppressive. So you're basically talking about pro-people, proactive, participative, and the concept like stakeholder. So we value what we think, embraces entire humanity. So you are talking about value orientation of community organization, because the way the value orientation happens, it actually shapes the way community development takes place. So what are you talking about basically? So if you look at International Federation of Social Work, it reaffirms the value of human rights and social justice, and which are the fundamental pillars of social work practice. So if you look at this quote which is there, which is put up in the International Federation of Social Work document, it says that social work profession promotes social change, it promotes problem solving in human relationship, it talks about empowerment and liberation of the people, and also it talks about enhancing well-being. So when you're talking about well-being, you need to look at human behavior, you need to look at social systems, you need to look at various theories which governs these values, and also it talks about intervening at points where people interact with their environment, and also looking at human rights. Besides human rights, you are also looking at social justice, which is fundamental to any social work practice. So what are the other core values? Because that is the base which we talked about in the last slide. But let us look at the core values, which we always look at when you are looking at social work education, which is fundamental to all practices in social work. Dignity and worth of the person. Even if you are working in a larger community, each individual's dignity and person's worth is important. Importance of human relations, because unless you are looking at relationships as important, you will not be able to nurture it, which will lead to further kind of stages where you're talking about participation, or where you're talking about participative democracy. So you are also talking about, when you're talking about core values, you are looking at human rights, because unless and until we recognize human rights and human dignity, you won't be able to understand the exclusive groups or the problems which are faced by particular groups in the community which are excluded because of various reasons, because it may be caste or religion or gender, or it might be region. So another core value which comes in is also integrity and competences, because every person has a capacity. We believe that people have capacity to understand their issues and intervene, and there is an integrity when you are working with the people. And also all of us as professional social workers, we need to be professional. Our conduct needs to be professional, which means that we uphold all these values, not just as words but also in the spirit, so that when we work, they are translated into transformative changes, which we have talked about in the earlier slides. So let us look at some other value framework which are talked about by Murray Ross, because Murray Ross is another person who is an great exponent of community organization. So what does he talk about? He says that the essential dignity and ethical worth of the individual is very important, because it is something which you have to consider every time you enter into the community. That would mean that every person in the community, irrespective of what socioeconomic background or what region or what race they come from, each one is worth it, each one has dignity, and you have to respect that. It also means that every individual has potentialities, has resources, and they understand their issues. In fact, what your role is facilitating. So the assumption that there are some, there are people who don't understand or who do not have potentialities has to be thrown out. You have to go with this kind of a value framework that everybody has potentials, they have resources, and all of them are capable of managing their own life. Okay. Also, we need to look at that every individual has the right to express. When we talk about freedom of expression as one of the fundamental rights, so you have to acknowledge that every person in the community has the right to express and right to express their own individuality. So, and when you are working in the community, every individual has the capacity to grow. They change, they are all social beings, they have, have different kinds of needs. And every person has the right to take care of their own physical needs or physical necessities. So if they are demanding any kind of services, so the base is that they have a right to all those services. It's not that you're giving some charity or you're considering and you're giving them services. So they have a right to it, be it education or toilet facilities or water facilities. It's not something you're doing some kind of a outside kind of a charity or some kind of consideration for them. It's their right. And every individual in the community, they have a need to struggle and strive to improve themselves. They want to do it. Okay, so they want to improve themselves because they are part of the community. So the more they improve, the more the community improves. So if you're keeping these things in mind, you also need to recognize that they have a right to seek help if they are in crisis. So if they are seeking help, that does not make them, diminishes them or their worth or dignity or their rights. It is their right to seek help, and you are there, basically you have the capacity to provide whatever help they need without compromising their individual worth and dignity. So whenever you're talking about individual growth or people should participate or people have potentiality to grow, that means you have to provide that kind of social climate. You have to provide means community has to provide. So if you're talking about community, to provide this, then you will have to talk about how individuals can participate in the community. They can participate only if they are given opportunities. So you are talking about basically the importance of discussion, conference, consultation, where people can be brought together, where they can share their problems and they are given opportunities to resolve the problem. Okay, so the importance of social organization is very, very, essentially you have to look at it, because when you're talking about self-help in any kind of program, you're talking about opportunities given for people to actually express what their needs are, make choices, and also participate in developing programs which are suitable to their own needs. So, what does it mean? It means that the rights and responsibility of individual to participate in every single affair in the community. It means that the social organization, which is very important, is something in which individual feels responsible, which is responsive to their own individual feeling. And it also means that, as Murray Ross refers, that the community practice is a method of social work. It's a method of social work practice firmly embedded in this notion that the goals which are implicit in the values of the social work education profession has to be translated into community practice. How do we understand values? Of course, when you talk about values, there are professional values and there are values about people. As a profession, we hold certain values. So, community practitioners must be responsible partners, basically, in bringing the change. Okay, the process, the whole social work profession itself, it is infused with values of profession. And these values of professions are embedded again in purpose of social work, and they are guided by professional standards and ethical practice. So When you're talking about values about people, you are basically talking about respecting the diversity among the people, respecting the variations and lifestyles. That would mean that you will be working with people which are different in race, different in caste groups, different in religion, region, and your own biases should not interfere in your functioning with these kind of groups. So you are basically, when you're talking about the value of self-determination or non-judgmental attitude, which is core values of social work education, or confidentiality in practice, or looking at self-worth and dignity, it should be regardless of what background they come from, what cultural background they come from, what is their lifestyle. And if you believe on those core values of social work education or social work practice, they all get translated very much when you are talking about community practice. When you are talking about values with regard to, as a professional, and values with regard to people, you are also talking about values with regard to society. Because the community practitioners assume responsibility in confronting injustice and inequality. So one has to understand that discrimination is happening. So there is a commitment to make social institutions just. So if you are capable of looking at injustice, you will be moving towards making possible changes so that there is justice. So, and also the commitment to develop a humane society, to be responsive to human needs, to refine social programs in such a way that it caters to the needs of the people and it leads to democratic process, and which will ultimately lead to social justice. So you have to follow a certain ethical practice standards, and these particular ethics or ethical practice standards are very well defined by, if you look at NASW Code of Ethics, National Association of Social Work Code of Ethics, it clearly enlists number of values and ethical standards which we need to follow. Community work practitioners support individual groups and organizations in the process of community practice, which is based on certain values and practice principle. So what are the values we are talking about? We are talking about social justice. As I said earlier, one has to believe in social justice. So what is social justice? It is basically which governs human rights, civil rights, citizens' rights and social welfare. So human rights, when you're talking about human rights are intrinsic rights to protect human life. It is to protect the sense or the security one feels when there is a sense of freedom of or personal liberty. So ethical codes basically mandates that social work professions promote the sense of social justice, they promote sense of economic justice, and they protect the rights of the individual with regard to freedom of expression, with regard to upholding their worth and dignity, with regard to rights of the individual for various kinds of services which should be accessible to them. The general principles in NASW Code of Ethics, which was formulated in 1990, prescribes professional conduct in relation to societal responsibilities. So even when you look at this, you have to see that in the Indian frame of reference, one has to adapt all this. So, but these are the guiding principles which probably are universal, which are applicable wherever you work. So what are you talking about? You are basically talking about, or the Code of Ethics is basically talking about eliminating personal and institutional discrimination, because discrimination can be done by individuals, it basically is done by institutions. So one has to eliminate that. You have to ensure that everybody has access to needed resources and opportunities irrespective of whatever class, caste, creed or gender they belong to. There needs to be expansion of opportunities for everyone, especially for the people who are disadvantaged or are excluded or they are disenfranchised. There has to be respect for cultural diversity in the society, and one has to advocate, because it doesn't happen on its own. You become part of advocating groups which helps in bringing the change, which improves the social conditions and promotes social justice. And the whole the concept of community practice, or the whole principle which is guiding all this, is encouraging participation of the people in democratic process, especially the people who are excluded in the community. You're talking about self-determination and empowerment, because that is one of the value which we have looked at earlier. What is the self-determination value? It talks about that every individual and every community has the capacity, or they need to be acknowledged for their understanding of their own problems. So when you're talking about concerns or issues, they have to be identified by the community, because they are the one who are facing the problem. So what happens over here is that you know the opportunities which are provided comes from the discussions, comes from it emerges from the discussions which happens in the community. Promoting the view that community do not have right to decide for themselves is not self-determination. Self-determination is basically that communities understand their issue, you have to facilitate, you have to empower, you have to provide needed information, needed kind of intervention, so that they are able to develop ability to deal with their own problems. They are able to discuss and come up with proper intervention which will resolve their issues. When you are working in the community, you are basically working and learning together. So community practice involves collaborative efforts between the varied interest groups, government and its citizens, as which was even said in the earlier slide. So value demonstrate that collective working is effective because it encourages democracy, it encourages participation of everyone, and the culture of informed decision making, when there is accountability is there, because if there is a informed decision making, accountability increases. The more the accountability, the more the democratic functioning in the community. And these are the things which we need to keep in mind when you're talking about values. We are basically talking about sustainable community. That would mean that at one given point, you as a community practice worker may move out and communities are able to take care of themselves. So what are these sustainable communities? They are empowered enough, or sustainable communities promote the empowerment of individuals and communities, and they support communities in developing these skills, whereby they are able to take decisions for themselves. So you're talking about autonomy, you're talking about accountable structures, you're talking about collective and collaborative working, which helps in inculcating the whole process of participating in everything. So next part to community, when you're talking about sustainable community, is participation. So when you're talking about participation, you're talking about individual, community, and traditionally marginalized as well as excluded community needs to participate in the process of availing services or bringing change into the community and making it more sustainable in terms of promotion of social justice. So recognizing challenges, barriers and overcoming it, which will lead to effective participation, is necessary when you are talking about working in the community. All this happens when there is reflectivity, when people working in the community also have reflective practice. That means that community work should strive to promote and support individual and collective learning, or through reflection and practice, reflection on practice. That means whatever you do, there has to be a reflective process. Whenever there are programs are implemented, one has to go back and reflect whether those programs have been effective, and this reflection takes place with the community. So you are looking at constraints and context within which community development takes place, and this happens when there is a reflection on a continuous basis by the people engaged in community practice. What are the assumptions and purposes? Okay, so Whale and Gamble has outlined a set of 8 purposes which provides the basis for most community practice engagement. So you are talking about improving the quality of the life of the member of the community. You are basically talking about human rights once again, and how do you achieve human rights? By developing participative structures, deepening democracy for citizens, specifically who are excluded, okay, so that they feel empowered enough to influence the policies which again will influence their lives, and also advocating for community interest, especially marginalized groups including children. So when you are talking about excluded group, it might be caste wise, it might be gender wise. So marginalized population needs to be looked at. So that is a basic purpose which has been pinpointed by Whale and Gamble in the 2004 document which talks about purpose. Let's look at some other purposes. Along with this, you are also talking about human and social development of the community people, so that there is some kind of assurance of social support, there is viability and sustainability of expanding participation, there is grassroots leadership, because leadership needn't be autocratic or it needn't represent a particular dominant group in the community. So one has to talk about how do you build political assets for the poor, so that both in urban and rural areas, so that they are able to participate and avail the services. You are basically talking about services and program planning for newly recognized or reconceptualized needs or to serve an emerging population. You are also talking about service integration, developing local to national or international levels, which when you are engaged in coordinating human services for the population in need, that would include marginalized and the excluded groups. So you are talking about basically a political and social action to build political power for the economically and socially marginalized people, so that they feel protected and they are able to, there is a fostering of institutional change for inclusion of these people, there is a sense of equity, and there is an increase in the participation of the people in the democratic processes at the community level, which translates at the national level and at the international level. And social justice is built from the grassroots, which cuts across race, ethnicity, gender or nationality, because the opportunities which need to be available at the local level are made possible because the purpose of the community practice is basically to facilitate this process. The assumptions that influence the method of community organization, it derives basically from the value orientation which you have looked at earlier. Okay, so some of the assumptions are that communities of people can develop their own capacities to deal with their own problems. Okay, people want change and they can change. People should participate in making, adjusting, controlling and controlling the resources which are available in the communities, and change takes place within the community from the bottoms up. Changes in the community living which are self-imposed or self-developed sustain longer. They have a meaning and permanence that imposed changes do not have. So if the changes happen from within and they are governed by participative kind of practices, so that leads to changes which are more sustainable or permanent. Okay, so a holistic approach needs to be there, which can deal successfully with the problems and which cannot be handled or which cannot be achieved if there is fragmented approach. So democracy requires cooperative participation. It requires participation from all level, and communities of people need help in organizing themselves and are able to understand their own, determine what their needs are and how they can bring changes so that their needs can be fulfilled. So let's just summarize. We basically talked about the value framework. We talked about the value basis. We talked about why it is important to have these value bases for any kind of community practice. We have highlighted certain aspects which are like core to values of community work: social justice, human rights, sense of self-determination, learning together, sustainable communities, participation and reflective practice. So there has to be ability to recognize and appreciate the importance of all of this, and also look at assumptions and purpose of social work. And when you incorporate all this in the community practice, that is when real kind of transformative changes happen. So I would like to end this by saying that please look at the e-text. It would be also helpful if you are able to look at Murray Ross and his books on community organization. Please look at NASW Code of Ethics, because it gives in detail various aspects which you need to keep in mind when you are working in the community. I hope this particular lesson was useful to you and you will be able to use it wherever you are working with the communities. Thank you.